All right, I'll let a few more of you trickle in here before we get going. But feel free to load up questions in the chat here. If you're on Twitter or YouTube or Facebook, thank you for joining us. We'll get going in just a second here and talk about the news of the day with Sean Miller making it official that Jerome Hunter has torn his Achilles. I assume you all can hear me. All right, looks like the sound is good. All right, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, Ben, we're gonna get into all that here in a second. I'll let a few more of you trickle in. Looks like we're up to about 45, 50 people here, so we'll get going. All right. So you all have now seen the big news of the day. Sean Miller makes it official today during his press conference. Jerome Hunter has suffered a torn Achilles. It happened during Monday's practice. I posted it on the message board last night as the information was first coming out. And I mean, when you hear torn Achilles, you pretty much know it's not questionable. It's not like a knee injury where you got to get the MRI done. You got to do some more investigating there. It's pretty much like right away, if they think it's an Achilles, that's what it is. So I knew it wasn't good when we got that news last night, but no one had gone on the record and confirmed it yet. Sean Miller did that today. So Jerome Hunter, he wasn't going to come back this year, obviously. He was still working his way back from the heart attack he suffered back in June, but he had gotten back to a point where he was cleared to practice with the team. He had been going at it with them for the last few weeks, and this is just a brutal, brutal setback for him. I mean, life has a way of being cruel at times, and this is certainly one of those instances. So I think a few things that are top of the mind when we hear this news. First of all, what's this mean for Jerome? How is he doing? What's next for him? The answer there is he's scheduled to get surgery later this week. He still intends to come back next season and play. Sean Miller said the expected recovering time is going to be somewhere around 6 months. I know everybody else has their ideas of what an Achilles surgery takes to come back from, and they think that might be a different timeline. I'm not a doctor. I don't have more information than Sean Miller does. I'm just going to go with what he gave us today. So we'll go with 6 months for now. And again, the expectation is that Jerome Hunter plans to come back next season for Xavier. So I guess that's a little bit of a silver lining here, but still just absolutely brutal news for Jerome. And the other part of that is, I haven't talked to Jerome. We haven't heard from Jerome from a media standpoint or anything like that. We saw his tweet last night. I think, all things considered, he's doing about as well as he can be doing right now from what I've heard. But yeah, this is just terrible news for him. The other side of this is, what does this mean for Xavier? Because if you listen to Paul Fritchner and I yesterday during the Musketeer Report podcast, we spent a decent amount of time talking about the future of the front court for Xavier and what Xavier would do this offseason. I mentioned, with the idea that Jerome is coming back from this heart situation and you've got Zach Freemantle coming back from another foot surgery, granted, those two guys are starter level players in the Big East, and you're expecting them to come back next year. But I think you also have to have a contingency plan in place if they're not able to return to the form that you expect them to return to. And then literally within hours, this happens to Jerome Hunter. So that adds even another layer to what we were talking about there in terms of, yes, these guys are coming back, but it's still questionable, and you still might need someone else to start the season in Jerome's place and eat up more of those minutes as the season goes along. So I definitely think this adds another layer of complication for the coaching staff in terms of, you've got Jerome and Zach coming back. You've got Abu and Gitas coming back. You've got the 3 freshmen in theory that can come back. Now, what do you do this offseason? How many of those guys actually make their way back to Xavier next season? And do you look to add someone else in the transfer portal? And obviously, I said I do expect them to look at the transfer portal. I think there's also the possibility that you could look at, other prospects out there, maybe 2025. They're going to have a visitor this weekend who's a big man from New Zealand coming in. He's a 2025 recruit, but it's been talked about that he could even reclassify to 2024. So maybe there's a prospect out there that they like enough that would be willing to do that as well. So I definitely think that they will be looking for another front court piece to add this offseason. This news about they would have been doing that regardless, I think, but this news about Jerome probably only adds to the potential need to do that. So with that being said, I want to thank you guys also for yesterday. We had a 75% off sale. It was a good one for us. We had a lot of new signups. So if you are on board, I really appreciate that. And also all of you who shared that yesterday on your own Twitter feeds or other places, it really means the world to me and my family. You know, this isn't money that's going to some CEO that you never see or whatever. I mean, this is very literally paying for our life here. So we really do appreciate it. With that said, go ahead. If you guys got questions, I'm willing to go here for a little while. I've got the NKU coaches show tonight, and I got to get to that at some point. But we have a good 30 minutes or so here if you want to chat. Yeah, Did you hear Sean's comments on the radio show? Expecting 3 to 4 new faces next year, said David. That's not a surprise. I mean, every year you're going to have teams looking to retool now in the transfer portal. And every year you're also going to have players on your roster that are looking for another opportunity. I mean, the game has just changed in terms of guys sticking around and staying in one place for 4 years. With the new rules being that you can transfer without any penalty, without having to sit out, not only are guys going to do that, but they're silly not to, quite honestly. I mean, if you're in a bad situation where you're not playing a lot, or you're in a situation where you're not making much NIL money, but you could somewhere else, you're able to leverage the transfer portal. And so that's going to create a lot more player movement every single year. And I think just if you look at Xavier's roster this year, there are some changes that will need to be made for next season. So yeah, I mean, no surprise at all that they're expecting some new faces. I think there's definitely going to be a few guys that are on this current roster that won't be back next year, in addition to Quincy Oliveri, who will exhaust his eligibility after this season. But they'll need to replace a few guys, but they'll also need to upgrade at a position or two, I think, as well. I don't see too many questions loaded up here. So if you've got questions, you want to get them in, feel free to chime in. You can do so on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, wherever you're watching this. I can read your comments from anywhere. So feel free to chime in with those and we'll get to you. Tim, this is probably the most commonly repeated thing that I've heard since Jerome's injury. Tell him to call Aaron Rodgers' doctor. Yes, we will acknowledge that Aaron Rodgers has also had this injury and he recovered quickly. Let's make sure that's out of the way so no one else feels the need to say that. Troy says, what a gut punch after what he experienced in Indiana along with the last few months. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing that people forget about is going back to his early days at Indiana. He had that really weird situation. I don't know exactly what all was documented there, but it seemed like it was some type of like blood issue maybe. There wasn't a lot of information about it at the time, and he had some type of surgery on his leg then. It took him a while to come back, and things never really got on track for him at Indiana. So it feels like, up until last season where everything finally clicked for him at the end of the year and into the NCAA tournament, he had always been just trying to get his career on track. And then right when he finally does at Xavier, it all gets taken away from him in just cruel fashion, back-to-back setbacks like this. It just really, really tough. You hate to see that for a young guy. Troy says, I thought we saw great improvement in the bigs over the last month. Having Jerome on the scout team had to have something to do with it. Yeah, I mean, I think that contributes for sure. But a lot of it, too, is just the natural learning curve with a lot of these young big men and also the international big men who had so much to learn. But there's no doubt. I think Jerome talked about it on the podcast that he did with Sean Miller and Paul and Adam, where he said, there's a difference between kind of being the old head on the bench who's telling guys, you should do it this way, do it that way, versus being out on the floor in practice and kind of demonstrating the right way to do things and just leading by example. And also the credibility you have when you do want to pull a player aside and say like, hey, this is how we do things. it's a lot easier if you're actually out there banging with the guys, working hard with them, running, all of those types of things. It just lends to the credibility a lot more. And I think that was a good insight by Jerome to point that out. Sean and company have done a tremendous job with the team this year. As for the staff, do you see any assistants heading for a bigger job next season, or do you think they'll stick around? I think with David Miller, he's still very young, and I think he really likes working with Sean Miller. They're kind of trying to get this international recruiting thing going together. I don't see him going anywhere. Dante Jackson, Xavier guy, I think he is someone who is definitely had his reputation increase in the coaching community over the last 3 or 4 seasons. It was a guy like at first when we came back to Xavier, I think some people were looking at that as like, oh, Travis Steele is doing him a favor and bringing him back and giving him an opportunity that maybe he may not be ready for or hadn't earned or what have you. I mean, it just bounced around a little bit and hadn't really found his footing when he first got hired back here. But since then, he's really developed a reputation as being not only the Dante Jackson that we all know, which is like super hard worker, committed to practice every day, brings incredible energy, all of those types of things, but also as a recruiter. I mean, he went out and he made some inroads, especially in the New Jersey area, that I just didn't expect out of him. I thought he would be much more regional, local based in terms of his recruiting, but he's really made some nice inroads in those New England prep schools and that New Jersey, New York scene. So Dante has done a great job making a bigger name for himself, but I still think he's probably at Xavier for the time being. I haven't heard of any big jobs that are coming after him, any of those other big time programs that are trying to steal him away. And obviously there are always legitimate financial things you have to think of and all of that. But for right now, I would feel really good about Dante being back next year as well. So that's 2 of the 3 assistants. The final one would be Adam Cohen, who's the current associate head coach. And I know Sean is really high on him and what he's brought to Xavier since he was hired with Sean's new staff and what he's meant to the offensive side of things. I feel like that's really worked well for them. The thing with Adam is he is getting to the point where at some point he's going to be a head coach, I would think. And I don't know if this will be the offseason where someone gives him that opportunity, but I do think if the right job opened up, he would definitely put his name in the mix and there would be the potential that would happen. So there's nothing that I've heard yet to this point about schools looking at Adam or him looking to get out or anything like that. I think all of this has gone really well so far. The new staff that Sean has put together. I'm interested to see how the recruiting goes from here because this year was obviously a big rebuilding year and they did it in a bit of an unorthodox manner because they had the late news with Jerome and Zach in the summer. They had to go out and find some new front court pieces via the international route. So I'm interested in how that continues to evolve as they do this recruiting thing and they bring in the international guys. But right now it feels like the staff has really worked well together and they've got a good culture in the program right now. So I'm anxious to see where it goes from here. And I would say it's more than likely that the assistants will all be back next year. Tim says, brutal. Please pass along our prayers for a speedy recovery. When do you anticipate Zach being able to start practicing with the team? Thanks, Paul. I mean, guys, how does that happen? I don't understand how you guys do that. I'm Rick, Tim. Nice to meet you. But yeah, I think Zach he's already back in the mix a little bit, doing some non-contact stuff. I don't know when he'll be fully back at it, going 100%, but this is certainly something that they're not going to rush. So he'll be back in plenty of time for next season. He's obviously already sort of in the mix and working his way back right now. All right. Any other questions out there? Just wanted to check in with you guys, talk about the Jerome Hunter news from today with Sean making it official. Had a little bit of time here before I had to run out. Also wanted to thank you again for for what you guys did yesterday during the 75% off sale. It really meant a lot. All right, Tim, I forgive you. You said you were driving and you did know it was me and not Paul. So I'll forgive you on that one, Tim. Thanks. Thanks for the response. It's amazing how often that happens though, where it's like I get called Adam or Paul, or they get the same thing. It's like we're all the same person if we cover college basketball or cover Xavier, I guess. All right. Anybody else out there before we wrap this thing up? All right. John says the 3 to 4 new faces that Sean is expecting to bring in at Xavier. Do you them adding any more to the? Do you see them adding any more to the freshman class along with Powell, or will those faces come via the portal? It'll depend. It'll depend on who all is leaving after this year, who you need to replace. But I think you've got enough young guys in the system right now that you'd feel pretty good about. That if it is another freshman, you'd only be looking for really talented guys that you would feel would be difference makers down the line. I don't think you're going after like a top 100 ish, top 110 type of guy. I think you're looking more like those top 60 ish type players. And obviously, if they're an international recruit, it's going to be tough to put a ranking on them. But you get the idea there. You're looking for difference makers if you're going the freshman route. If you're going the transfer portal route, then it's a little bit different. So I would say if we're talking 3, you're probably looking at 3 transfers. If we're talking 4, you're probably looking at 3 or 4 transfers and maybe 1 freshman would be my answer to that. I don't see them bringing in multiple freshmen under really any circumstances for next year's class. I mean, they already have Jonathan Powell, so that's 1, but I don't see them bringing in more than 2 overall, including Powell for next season. I just think that would be too much inexperience, and they'll have a roster next year, I think, that will be in place to win games if they can make maybe 1 more upgrade to the starting lineup, or maybe even one of the top rotational pieces like 6th or 7th man. So that I think is kind of going to be the goal during the offseason with the transfer portal. You've got to find a shooter to replace Quincy Oliveri. He's the one guy that for sure is going to be gone. And I would argue that this year they already don't have enough shooting. So finding a big time shooter in the transfer portal is going to be priority number 1. From there, I think I would look at a big man next. Looking to upgrade the starting center position would probably be my secondary priority after I find that shooter. And I would be fine with taking 2 shooters. Like if you find a dynamic guard that can shoot from the outside and you get a spot up shooter that's more of like a wing or a hybrid front court player, something like that, I'd definitely be interested in that if I was the coaching staff. All right. I think that's all we got for right now. I don't see any other questions in the chat, so I'm going to jump off here, but appreciate you guys chiming in. We'll try to do this a little bit more frequently, just randomly take your questions on a live stream here and go from there. So thank you all for tuning into this. Thank you all for yesterday once again, and we'll see you on the message board.